The most feared woman in Chicago finance could read a man's balance sheet like a signed confession. Yet she had spent 3 years and the better part of a fortune trying to read the silence of her own 6-year-old son, and she had failed at it every single day. The best pediatric specialists in the country told her the boy might never speak again. They said it gently, the way people say terrible things to someone who could buy and sell their entire hospital. And then, on an unremarkable Thursday in late October, in a ballroom roaring with 500 guests, a tired stranger in scuffed work boots knelt down on the marble, murmured something under his breath that no one else could hear, and the boy answered him. What that stranger said, and the reason a child who had been mute for over 1,000 days chose to break that silence for him, and no one else, would tear open everything Eleanor Castellan believed she had already survived. Eleanor Castellan ran her life the way she ran Meridian Capital Partners, on margins, on precision, on the cold mathematics of what could be controlled. From the 44th floor of a glass tower in the Loop, she managed $11 billion of other people's faith and her own relentless certainty. Her rivals called her the surgeon, partly for the way she carved up failing companies and stitched the profitable pieces back together, and partly because of the unnerving calm she kept while she did it. Men twice her age went quiet when she entered a conference room. She had not raised her voice in 9 years. She had never needed to, but the surgeon's instruments did not work at home. Home was a restored Greystone on the near north side, all warm brick and tall windows, and inside it lived a small boy named Micah who had not said one word in 1,096 days. Eleanor knew the exact number. She kept it the way other mothers kept height marks on a door frame. Micah had his father's stillness and his father's quiet hazel eyes, and he moved through the rooms of that beautiful house like a child made of held breath. He communicated in a vocabulary of small gestures, a nod, a shake of the head, a finger pointed at what he wanted, and a worn tablet he kept in a sling across his chest that spoke for him in a flat synthetic voice. Hungry, tired. Stop, Mom. The silence had begun on Lake Michigan. 3 Augusts ago, a dinner cruise had pushed out past Navy Pier under a sky that the captain swore was clear for hours. Eleanor was supposed to have been on that boat. It was an anniversary, a rare evening she had carved out of a quarter end she should never have left. And, at the last possible moment, a deal in Singapore had collapsed, and she had stayed behind to save it. Her husband, Aaron, had taken Micah anyway. Aaron was like that, easy and unbothered, the soft counterweight to everything hard in her. "We'll wave at your building from the water," he'd texted. "Go close your deal, counselor." The squall came up off the lake, with no mercy and almost no warning, the kind of late summer violence that locals respect and tourists never see coming. 40-knot gusts, a wall of rain, water turned to standing black hills. The boat took on the lake faster than anyone could believe a boat could. Aaron got Micah's life vest, cinched and lifted him over the rail to the rescuers, and then the deck went out from under him. They found him the next morning 2 miles down the shoreline. Micah, 4 years old, had been in the cold water for 19 minutes before a Coast Guard swimmer reached him. The boy came home from the hospital without a scratch and without a sound. The diagnosis, delivered eventually by Dr. Anna Sorensen, the gentlest and most respected child psychiatrist in the Midwest, was traumatic mutism layered over an acute stress disorder. "His voice works perfectly, Eleanor, doctor," Sorensen had said, more than 2 years and 40 appointments into their work. "There's nothing physically wrong. Somewhere in him, sound and that night got welded together. His own voice is part of the memory he can't go back into. He'll speak again when some deep part of him decides it is finally, truly safe. And I'm sorry, but that is the one thing none of us can manufacture for him. Not even you. Not even you." Those 3 words had followed Eleanor into every sleepless hour since. She had moved markets with a phone call. She had funded a wing of the very hospital where her son was treated. She had flown a specialist in from Zurich on a Tuesday and sent him home on Wednesday, and she could not buy her own child 1 syllable. 12 miles south, in a narrow, rented 2-flat in Bridgeport, a man named Wyatt Brennan was at his kitchen table at 6 in the morning, counting out a week of test strips and a vial of insulin, and doing the arithmetic he did every week, which was the arithmetic of whether the numbers would stretch. Wyatt was 35 and looked older around the eyes, the way men do when sleep has become a thing they ration. He ran a one-truck operation he'd named, with more hope than accuracy, Brennan Marine and Restoration. He fixed docks. He rebuilt the trim on old wooden runabouts that rich men loved and could not maintain. He had good hands and a back that was starting to argue with him, and he made just barely enough. The medical bills were the reason for the arithmetic. His daughter, Posey, was 8, sharp as a tack and twice as stubborn, and she'd had type 1 diabetes since she was 5. Insulin, sensors, the endocrinologist, the supplies that insurance decided this quarter it would only half cover. It added up to a quiet, constant bleeding that no amount of careful budgeting ever quite stopped. On the counter behind him sat a small stack of envelopes he'd stopped opening, stamped in red. What almost no one knew, because Wyatt never told them, was that he had not always smelled like marine varnish and lake water. For 11 years, he had been an aviation survival technician in the United States Coast Guard, a rescue swimmer, the man they lowered out of a helicopter on a steel cable into the worst water. On the worst nights, the one trained to swim toward what everyone else was swimming away from. He had pulled people out of capsized fishing boats off Alaska and out of floodwater in 2 states. He had a chest full of commendations in a shoebox he never opened, and he had walked away from all of it 3 years ago and never looked back, because there was a night on Lake Michigan he could not stop carrying. Dad. Posey appeared in the doorway in mismatched socks, her sensor blinking faintly under the hem of her sleeve. It says, "I'm 190, then drink some water and we'll check again before the bus, Peanut." He swept the insulin into the fridge before she could see how little was left. "You want eggs?" That morning, Wyatt was about to start the biggest job his little company had ever landed. A downtown event firm had subcontracted him to build the centerpiece of a charity benefit. A custom installation of teak decking and salvaged sailcloth and a quarter-scale wooden lighthouse, the kind of thing only a man who actually knew boats could make look real. The benefit was being thrown by Meridian Capital Partners at the Drake Hotel, the grand old pile up on the Gold Coast where the lake fills every north-facing window. The theme was Harbor of Light, and the proceeds were going to a children's hospital. Wyatt had taken the job because it paid in one check what 3 months of dock repair paid, and because he'd be done and gone before the guests ever arrived. He had no idea whose benefit it was. He had never once heard the name Eleanor Castellan. He only knew that for the first time in a long time, the arithmetic was going to come out right. The Drake's Grand Ballroom by 4 that afternoon was a controlled riot. Florists wheeled in carts of white roses and blue delphinium. A lighting crew tested gels that washed the gold room in shifting tides of color. A string quartet rehearsed in one corner, while a sound engineer fought feedback in another, and event coordinators crossed and recrossed the floor with the wired intensity of people running on espresso and fear. Wyatt and his 2-man crew worked fast and quiet against the far wall, screwing down the last of the teak, raising the little lighthouse on its hidden base. It came out beautiful. Even the coordinators stopped to look. Eleanor arrived at 4:30 with Micah's hand in hers. Because she had refused, against the advice of everyone she paid, to leave him home with the nanny on a night she would not be there to put him to bed. She had a plan, the way she always had a plan. There was a quiet suite off the ballroom with noise-canceling headphones and his tablet and his favorite books, and a sitter named Mrs. Delgado, who had been with them for 2 years and knew his every signal, and the deal was simple. Micah would have his keynote night sleepover 3 doors down from his mother, and if anything frightened him, he had only to tap his tablet twice, and Mrs. Delgado would take him somewhere soft and dim. It held for exactly 2 hours. At 6:15, with the room filling and the noise rising, and a band now layered over the string quartet during the changeover, Mrs. Delgado turned for 30 seconds to take a phone call from her daughter, and when she turned back, the suite door stood open, and the small chair by the window was empty. The first Eleanor knew of it was her head of security, a calm mountain of a man named Reyes, appearing at her elbow in the middle of a conversation with a sitting senator and saying very quietly, "Ma'am, I need you now." She knew from his face before he said the rest. The bottom dropped out of the room. He can't have gone far, Reyes said, already moving, already speaking into his sleeve. Every exit's covered. He hasn't left the building, Eleanor. I promise you that. We lock it down right now and we sweep it floor by floor. He is 6 years old and he cannot call out. The surgeon's voice did not rise, but something underneath it had begun to come apart. If he's hurt, if he's stuck somewhere, no one will hear him. No one will hear him, Reyes. She did not wait for the protocol. She hiked the hem of a $4,000 gown into her fist and she ran. She ran through the ballroom in front of 500 guests and did not see a single one of them. She checked the coat room and the catering corridor and the heavy gold drapes along the windows, throwing them aside one by one. She checked the women's lounge and the service stairwell. The noise of the room, the band, the laughter, the clatter, the whole bright machine of her own charity, was the exact kind of sound that had always sent Micah folding inward, hands over his ears, and the thought of him alone inside that noise was a hand closing around her throat. It was Wyatt who found him. The crew had finished and the others had gone, but Wyatt had stayed to break down his ladder and load his truck, and on his way out, he'd slipped behind the lighthouse installation into the dim service alcove beneath the mezzanine stairs, looking for a drop driver bit. The alcove was dark and close and mercifully quiet, the ballroom roar reduced to a low underwater throb. And in the far corner, wedged between a stack of folded chairs and the cool plaster wall, was a small boy in a navy blazer with his knees drawn up to his chest and his hands clamped over his ears, rocking, fighting to breathe. Wyatt had seen that breathing before. The shallow, stacking gasps of a body convinced it was drowning on dry land. Old instincts he thought he'd drowned 3 years ago came up through him without permission. He did not lunge. He did not call out for help, because help meant noise and footsteps and strangers, and noise was the enemy here. He set his work light down on the floor so the beam pointed at the ceiling and threw a soft glow instead of a hard glare, and he lowered himself down to the boy's level, slow, deliberate, making himself small. "Hey, Captain," he said, low gravel in it, not looking straight at the boy. "Loud out there, huh? It's quieter back here. You found the good spot." The boy's eyes came open. Hazel, enormous, terrified. He pressed himself harder into the corner. "I'm not going to touch you. I'm just going to sit." Wyatt eased back onto his heels, 6 feet off, giving the kid all the room in the world. He saw the tablet in its sling, its screen dark and dead, and he understood the boy had no voice in this moment, none at all. He did not ask the boy's name. He did not ask where his parents were. He knew questions needed answers, and there was no room in a body like that for answers right now. The only job was to bring the boy back down out of the noise. He reached into his shirt pocket and took out the thing he always carried, a smooth flat stone the color of old slate, worn satiny from years in his thumb. He turned it over in his rough fingers where the boy could see. "When my daughter gets scared," Wyatt said, to the stone, not to the boy, "I tell her something my grandpa told me out on the water. You ready? It's a secret." He let it sit. The boy's breathing hitched, caught, came a half-beat slower. Out on the lake at night, every lighthouse has its own count. You watch the light go dark, and you think it's gone for good. But it isn't. You just count, and it always comes back around. 1, 2, 3, there it is. He turned the stone again. You can't lose the light if you keep counting. It always comes back. The boy's hands came down from his ears, just an inch. Wyatt held out the stone flat on his palm, the way you offer sugar to a horse you don't want to spook. It's smooth all the way around. Feels good when your hands are scared. You want to hold it? A long moment. Then a small hand uncurled from the boy's knee and reached out, trembling, and the boy's fingers brushed Wyatt's calloused palm and took the stone and pulled it to his chest like something rescued. "There you go." Wyatt smiled, a worn, gentle thing. "I'm Wyatt. You got a name, Captain?" The boy opened his mouth. Nothing came. Not a sound, not a breath of one. And the look that crossed his small face then was so familiar, so much grief crammed into so little a person, that Wyatt's chest went tight. He had seen that exact look on the faces of people pulled out of water that had taken someone they loved. "That's okay," Wyatt said quickly, leaning in, dropping his voice into a low, even cadence. The rhythm he'd once used in the back of a rescue basket 200 feet over black water, a cadence he had not let himself touch in 3 years. You don't have to say anything, just breathe with me. The light always comes back. Count with me. 1, 2. And that was the moment Eleanor Castellan tore back the curtain of the alcove. She had her phone in her hand and Rhea's name half formed on her lips, and the sight in front of her froze the scream in her throat. A strange man in a work shirt and a tool belt, kneeling in the dim, and sitting on the dusty floor in front of him, holding something gray and small in both fists, calm, was her son. Micah was not crying. Micah was not rocking. Micah was staring up at the stranger with a focus so total, so awake, that Eleanor barely recognized her own child's face. She had not seen him look at anyone like that since before the lake. "Micah," she breathed. Her son did not look at her. His eyes stayed locked on the man. His chest was heaving, but not with panic now, with effort. His knuckles were white around the little stone. His lips parted, and his throat worked, the muscles straining against something invisible and enormous, something Wyatt recognized and went perfectly still in front of, holding his own breath, not daring to break it. "It's okay," Wyatt whispered to the boy. "The light always comes back." Micah took a shuddering breath. A sound came out of him, raw, cracked, the dry hinge rasp of a voice that had been bolted shut for 1,000 days, suddenly forced to turn. And then, in a small, broken, unmistakable voice, looking straight into the stranger's eyes, the boy spoke. "Count with me." The silence that fell after those 3 words was the loudest thing Eleanor had ever heard. She put a hand out and found the wall, because her knees had simply stopped agreeing to hold her. He spoke. My son spoke. 3 years of held breath came out of her all at once, and she made a sound that wasn't a word. But across the alcove, the man's face had gone the color of ash. Because the moment that cracked little voice reached him, "Count with me," something detonated behind Wyatt's eyes. The helicopter's downwash. 40-knot rain coming sideways, a capsized hull half swallowed, and a child's life vest glowing in his dive light, and a 4-year-old boy he'd hauled to his chest in water cold enough to stop a heart, a boy gone rigid with shock and silence. To keep the kid breathing on the long ride up the cable, to keep him from going under into the gray place that took people, Wyatt had pressed his mouth to the boy's ear and given him the only thing he had. "Watch the light, buddy. Count with me. It always comes back around. 1, 2. Wyatt turned and looked at the woman on the floor in her ruined gown, and then back at the boy clutching the smooth stone, and the whole ruined night 3 years gone rose up and stood in the room with them. "Oh, God," Wyatt said, his voice splintering. "It's you. You're him." Eleanor crawled the last few feet across the dusty marble and gathered her son into her arms, and Micah let her, but his eyes never left the stranger. "Who?" she choked, her whole body shaking. "Who are you?" And Wyatt, 3 years of buried grief surging up all at once, did the only thing his cornered heart knew how to do. He stood, and he backed toward the curtain. "I have to go," he said. "I'm sorry. I have to go." And before she could stop him, before she could so much as say wait, he was gone, swallowed into the bright, roaring sea of the ballroom, leaving the most powerful woman in Chicago on the floor of a hotel basement with a son who had just, after 1,000 days, found his voice. For a full minute, Eleanor sat in the dust and did not move, holding Micah while the enormous effort of those 3 words pulled him down into a heavy, sudden sleep against her shoulder. Reyes found her there. He took one look, his billionaire employer weeping on a concrete floor, her gown gray with grime, and dropped to a knee. "He spoke, Reyes," she said, and her voice was nothing like the surgeon's. "He talked to a man, a workman, red flannel, tool belt, mid-30s. He built the lighthouse. He ran out of here 2 minutes ago." She drew a breath, and the steel came back into her, not cold now, but molten. "Cancel the rest of my night. Have the vice chair give the remarks. Get the car to the service entrance." She looked up. "And Reyes, I want to know who that man is. His name, where he lives, all of it. Before I get Micah home and into bed, do not come back to me empty." It took Reyes 90 minutes. The contracting company's paperwork led to a name, and the name led somewhere no one expected. Eleanor read the file in the back of her car with Micah asleep across her lap, and her hand began to shake before she reached the bottom of the first page. Wyatt Brennan. Former aviation survival technician, United States Coast Guard, Air Station Traverse City. 11 years of service. Decorated for valor. And there, in the duty log of one summer night 3 years gone, the deployment that had pulled a 4-year-old boy out of Lake Michigan 2 miles off Navy Pier after a dinner cruise went down in a squall. She did not sleep. At 9 the next evening, after she'd put Micah to bed and sat beside him until he was deep under, she had Reyes drive her to a narrow 2-flat in Bridgeport, and she climbed the worn front steps herself, alone, and knocked. Wyatt opened the door in a stretched-out t-shirt with a dish towel over his shoulder, and the sight of her on his stoop drained the blood from his face. Behind him, a little girl with a glucose sensor on her arm peered around the couch. "Mr. Brennan," Eleanor said. The Drake's grandeur was gone from her entirely. Her eyes were swollen, her voice low and stripped bare. She glanced past him at the small crowded living room, the worn furniture, the unopened red-stamped envelopes on the side table, the child's homework spread on the floor. "I'm sorry to come to your home, Ems. Castellan." He knew the name now. Everyone in the city knew the name. He leaned against the doorframe like a man who'd run as far as running would take him. "Look, I'm sorry I bolted on the job. You can keep the payment. I don't care about the lighthouse." She took a small step closer. "My head of security ran your contracting company. It took him 20 minutes to learn that before you fixed boats, you jumped out of them. That you were stationed at Traverse City. That 3 years ago this August, you were lowered into the lake off Navy Pier after a dinner cruise capsized in a storm." Wyatt's jaw worked. He said nothing. "My husband was on that boat," Eleanor said, and her composure broke clean in half. "His name was Aaron. He didn't come home, and my son," she had to stop. "My son was the little boy you pulled out of the water. Mr. Brennan, you are the reason my child is alive, and until last night I never knew your name." From the doorway behind him, a small voice. "Dad, is that lady okay?" Wyatt's eyes went to his daughter and then back, and something in his face changed. "Posy Peanut, go check your number for me and get your jammies on, okay? This is somebody from my work." Grown-up, boring stuff. He waited until the bedroom door clicked, and then he stepped back and held his own door wider, and Eleanor came into the small, bright kitchen that smelled of macaroni and antiseptic, and stood there in her dark coat like a creature from another planet. And the two of them looked at each other across 3 years of shared catastrophe neither had known they were carrying together. "You sang to him," Eleanor said. "It wasn't a question. In the water. Dr. Sorensen always told me he was waiting for a sign that he was safe. That somewhere in him, the night and his own voice got fused, and he wouldn't speak until something convinced him, all the way down, that he was out of it. I never understood what that sign could possibly be." Her voice fell to almost nothing. "It was you. It was your voice. Wasn't it?" Wyatt turned to the window and gripped the edge of the sink, the way he did when the past came at him. "He was the last one," he said quietly, to the dark glass. "We'd gotten everybody else off. The hull was almost gone. I went down through the rail, and he was hung up in his vest under the rail, 4 years old, eyes wide open, not making a sound, already in shock. The water was 48 degrees, Miss Castellan. You've got minutes." "And a man," Eleanor said, barely able to form it. "There was a man still in the water." Wyatt was quiet a long moment. "There was a man holding on to a piece of decking maybe 30 feet off. He saw me get to the boy. He could have called for me. He had every reason to. Instead, he yelled." Wyatt's voice frayed. He yelled, "Take my son. Take him first. Don't let go of my son." And then a swell came through, and when it cleared, he wasn't there anymore. Eleanor pressed both hands over her mouth. She had read the report. She had read the cold, clean police language of recovered, subsequent, time of. She had never heard it from the one set of hands that had been close enough to touch them both. "I had the boy," Wyatt went on, forcing the words out, owing them to her now. "I got him in the basket, and I rode up with him so he wouldn't be alone, and he was going under into the shock. His lips were going, and I couldn't have that, so I put my mouth on his ear and I gave him the only thing I had. Out at the station, there's a lighthouse you can see from the air at night, and as a kid, my grandpa used to make me count the flashes when I was scared. So I told the boy to watch the light and count with me. It always comes back around. 1, 2, there it is. I said it the whole way up. I said it until the medics took him. He turned around and his eyes were wet. I never knew his name. I never knew the man's name. I asked about him once and they told me he didn't make it, and after that I couldn't. He shook his head. I started having the attacks. Couldn't get in a helicopter. Couldn't hear a siren. My wife, Maeve, she died that same fall, an aneurysm, gone in an afternoon, and it was just me and Posey, and I thought, I can't be the guy who falls apart anymore. So I quit. I packed the medals in a box, and I bought a truck, and I started fixing docks, and I told myself the lake was done with me. Eleanor closed the distance between them. The CEO, who had never in her adult life initiated a touch with a stranger, reached out and put her arms around the rigid, exhausted carpenter and held on. "You didn't fail anyone," she said fiercely into his shoulder. "Do you hear me? My husband's last words on this earth were a prayer, and you are the man who answered it. You kept your promise to a dying stranger. You carried my son's soul out of that water, and you didn't even know you were still carrying it. He spoke because of you, Wyatt. After 1,000 days, the first thing my child said to the world was, 'Count with me.' He was asking you to do it again. He was asking you to bring the light back around." Wyatt's shoulders shook, and 3 years of silent, suffocating guilt finally cracked and began, at last, to let go of him. What came after did not happen the way money usually makes things happen. Eleanor Castellan had spent her whole career learning the precise weight and shape of every kind of leverage, and she understood, looking around that small kitchen, that the one thing she must never do was write this man a check. A blank check to a proud man for the life of her child would not be a gift. It would be an insult dressed as one. So she did not offer money. She offered something she had never given anyone, a door into her life that she chose to leave open. It started small. That Sunday, she invited the Brennans up to the Greystone, and while Wyatt stood awkwardly on the back patio with his hands shoved in his pockets, Posey and Micah found each other in the garden, the way children do, instantly and without negotiation. Posey, who had spent her short life being the careful one, the kid who couldn't eat the cupcakes at the party, met a boy who couldn't talk, and decided without a word that this was perfectly fine, and the two of them dug a hole to nowhere in the flower bed for an hour. From the patio, Eleanor watched her silent son, and she saw his shoulders, for the first time in years, come down from around his ears. Micah did not speak again for 9 days. And then on a Tuesday, in that same garden, he walked up to Wyatt, who had come by to look at a sagging fence post, and held up the smooth gray stone and rasped, "Wyatt," just the name. And Eleanor, watching from the kitchen window, set down her coffee cup very carefully so she would not drop it, and wept. After that, the silence came apart the way ice comes apart on the lake in spring, slow and then all at once. Single words first, dog, cold, more, then short, careful sentences. Eleanor did not throw specialists at it. She did the harder thing and simply let it happen, let Wyatt be a steady, undemanding presence who never once asked the boy to perform. Wyatt built Micah a small, soundproof reading nook under the stairs of the Greystone, lined in cedar, lit warm and dim, a deliberate echo of the good quiet spot under the mezzanine where the boy had first chosen to speak. He never pushed. He just sat in there some afternoons, sanding a piece of wood while Micah turned pages, and slowly the boy filled the cedar room with talk, and Eleanor, in return, did for Posey what she could not be persuaded to do for herself. She made the arithmetic stop. She did not announce it or make a production of it. She quietly steered Meridian's foundation toward a children's diabetes program at the hospital the benefit had been for, and somewhere in the fine print of that, the red-stamped envelopes in the Bridgeport kitchen simply stopped coming. Wyatt noticed. He started to object once, and Eleanor cut him off with a look that even the surgeon's rivals would have recognized. "You don't get to fight me on this one," she said. "You held your hand over my son's ears in the dark. Let me hold mine over your daughter. That's the whole deal." By Thanksgiving, my Akka's rasp had smoothed into the bright, ordinary, exhausting chatter of a 6-year-old who would not stop narrating his every thought. He argued with Posey over the rules of games they invented on the spot. He laughed, a sound Eleanor had genuinely begun to fear she would never hear again. An enormous and ridiculous belly laugh that filled the Greystone's high, quiet halls and pushed out 3 years of silence in a single afternoon. The healing did not run only one direction. One evening in early December, with snow coming sideways past the tall windows and a fire going, Eleanor slid a thick folder across the table to Wyatt the way she'd once slid term sheets across boardroom tables. "I'm not letting you pay for my truck," he said automatically. "It isn't about your truck. Open it." Inside was a proposal, and the longer he read, the more still he got. Meridian's foundation was launching something new, a water safety and trauma recovery program for kids across the Great Lakes, with floating therapy docks and small wooden boats built specifically for children learning to be unafraid of the water again. The renderings were beautiful: warm cedar, soft lines, the careful work of someone who understood that a child who'd been hurt by the lake had to be coaxed back, not commanded. And on the last page was a contract naming Brennan Marine and Restoration as the exclusive builder for every site. "I don't just want a contractor," Eleanor said, watching his face. "I want a man who knows what it actually costs to go into cold water after someone. A man who's been on both ends of the cable. I want you to build the places where kids learn the lake won't take them. Will you build them, Wyatt?" He looked at the renderings, and his thumb traced the edge of a small wooden boat, and through the wall came the sound of his daughter and her son arguing happily over a board game in a warm cedar room, both of them whole, both of them loud. The storm that had been inside him for 3 years had, somewhere along the way, finally moved off the water. "Yeah," he said, and his voice broke on it, and he smiled anyway. "Yeah, I'll build them." Eleanor smiled back, and for a moment neither of them said anything, and the thing that had been quietly growing in that warm room across all those Sundays sat there between them, unhurried and unafraid, with all the time in the world to become whatever it was going to become. Some people spend a fortune trying to buy back what was taken from them and find that the one thing they need cannot be purchased at any price. Eleanor Castellan commanded an empire and could not command a single word from her own child, and it took a broke ex-rescue swimmer with a shoebox of medals and an unopened stack of bills to give her what no specialist on earth could. And Wyatt Brennan, who had spent 3 years certain that the lake had cost him everything and left him with nothing but ghosts, learned that the boy he'd carried up out of the dark had been carrying him too, all that time, waiting in his silence to call him back. The lighthouse light, it turns out, always does come back around. You only have to keep counting. So, tell the people in the comments below, who is the stranger who once reached into your darkest water and changed the whole course of your life?